Project SELA, if you want to look for the big dog. I finally came to this after doing a whole bunch of other research, and finally, I wish I would have found this first, because it shows you all the projects on the left over there we've been looking at. Project Aurum, Rosalind, Polaris, to name a few. And then they come into the cybersecurity, the ECB digital euro, the digital shekel. You start to see a lot of these things that are collapsing right now, like European Union and Israel. They're collapsing, the banks, the monetary systems, the whole countries, regions are deflating. And it's all going to move to this, what's called Unidroit, which is the unified ledger here. So you can see how central banks work, Bank for International Settlements. This is kind of your schematic to see. So it's actually, if you're going to do any research, it's all under Project SELA, S-E-L-A. And everything dovetails off that. And then, Project Rosalind, there's 3 or 4 projects going off there as their own independent base layer off that. So you can go down the wormhole on this one if you want to. And welcome back. David Devine here, Adapt 2030, right here on TV. We're going to talk about the restructuring of the world, because what you can see right now in motion is the world is very unhappy, and they've had enough. The general citizen around the planet has just said, you know what? We've had enough. We see through their lies. We see through the illusions. We see it scripted. It's almost like watching a play unfold in front of you, and the piercing of the veil is complete around the planet. Even those who you thought would never, ever, ever, ever look into things more deeply and wake are awakened. So what's going to happen from this point? The same thing that always happens through history. War, economy reset, population migration. It's on a schedule right along with what we're seeing with amplified aurora coming down with just the tiniest of solar storms. There was another Halo CME, which should probably arrive tomorrow. Won't be as intense as the last one, sending red aurora all the way down to Ukraine and parts south into Texas. But now these stories are coming out, oh, the internet could go down for weeks or months because of the solar activity. They're kind of preparing us for downages. So as we look at Steve here, and this is an auroral rope that was named a fair few years back. 2017 was the first time this was seen, spotted, in the first folks to see it, obviously get to name it. They were all around a campfire, and they named it Steve. And since then, they have been sighted more and more frequently. Now, what you're looking at is an auroral rope, and it's an amplified current. And this is the strangest thing. Normally, when we have just regular CMEs come in and we get the pretty colors in the aurora, you don't normally have spiraled aligned currents flowing down into a glowing plasma state like this, really amplified electrical current discharge onto the planet from a very, very slight geomagnetic storm. So this shows our magnetic field around the planet's behaving strangely, which would explain humans behaving strangely too, because the lobes of your brain are electrical. So if there's a disruption or a change in field state, people are going to perceive reality differently, and I think that's what we're seeing. It can explain a lot of the madness, the insanity, but also a lot of the awakening. The elite know this. They're terrified that you are seeing in this new field that you can see through their lives. That's what scares them. So as we go through today's talk, it's more about what's planned after the economy. It's not even a collapse. It's a full evaporation to bring up a new system. Now just understand that. Coming from the fear, and they're going to try to portray it as you're going to lose everything, you're going to lose everything. Well, yes and no, but it's a planned evaporation, not a random collapse. So looking into last week's news, we saw the beginnings of what would be a quote unquote bank holiday. Our national debt is a real world problem. Our government spends more in interest payments than it does funding the Pentagon. In 2010, our debt, 13 trillion, gold 1,000 an ounce. 2020, the debt was 23 trillion and gold was 1,500 an ounce. 2023, 33 trillion US debt, and now 2,000 an ounce for gold. Call the proud Americans the Patriot Gold Group today before it's too late. Mention the Adapt 2030 channel. You're going to get some great in-class service. Also, Patriot Gold Group has a no fee for life IRA, where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold or silver. No fee for life IRA on qualifying rollovers. Give them a call, 888-546-7020. And now on with the video. So last Friday, a huge amount of banks were, there was no ACH payments. You couldn't do direct deposits. Payrolls didn't work. Some people's credit cards didn't work. Their ATMs at some points across the networks didn't work either. And I certainly couldn't sign on to do any online banking until probably 3:30 or 4 in the afternoon. So what we saw was basically a bank holiday. Now imagine if that rolls for 5 days on a Monday and nobody can, after day 2, there'd be panic in the streets of not being able to access money. A lot of people aren't prepared. The number one thing is a lot of people aren't prepared. So that tells you right there, you're going to need several days of food and water just to stay out of the chaos for a 5-day bank downage or something. So Citizens Bank fails. Bank of America is likely to be in the basket that will fail. Customers in these too big to fail banks seem to, I don't know, they're too big to keep their computer operating systems up and running, and they're too big to integrate with the Fed, and they're too big to clear with the Bank for International Settlements. It's all too big, but they all failed. So I don't know how that's working, but another one bites the dust, and that is in receivership now. And this is the weird thing. They're talking about refinancing mortgages that were held under Citizens Bank. So let's say you got a 3% mortgage, the move over into the now Iowa State Trust and something else bank. They were talking about refinancing the mortgages under the new, so you'll have to go from a 3% mortgage to like a 7 or a 6.5 or an 8 under the new ownership of those assets, which brings us definitely into today's talk about how Bank for International Settlements tokenization to create a stable coin that doesn't move because they can program in inflation or deflation. So Zimbabwe, speaking of that, highest interest rate is no longer, Argentina surpassed it. So as we look across the world, we're starting to see a lot of things that have changed. The baton has been passed, and we do see this quite a bit. And another large baton passing that should be of note is Zimbabwe introducing a digital gold-backed token, the ZIG, and it's sold out in like minutes of its issuance. So you're looking at some of these craziest, most defunct economies moving over to gold. And interestingly, as soon as they started issuing gold, their interest dropped. The inflation dropped in just the same day. It dropped like 20 points, which is insane when they start issuing gold-backed currency. 180% inflation drops to 150 or below in just a single day. Something to be said for having gold as your reserve asset. Now, here's the big thing. People are waking up across the planet and they're demanding change. Not just a stoppage of the war. That's kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. The inflation, the double talk of save the planet, but I'm going to go in my private jet. You see just so much hypocrisy, wasteful spending. It's so out in the open, the agendas to move your life into serfdom, and people have really had enough. It's pushed everybody to the wall, and they bounce back out of COVID. They thought it might get better. Then they have rampant inflation. And then this war thing is starting. So people are like, you know what, we're just done with it. And there's pushback in almost every nation across the planet. Now, what would governments do to try to maintain control and divert that anger? Start a war, of course. That's what they always do. If everything else is failing, they take you or countries to war, or us. That's the number one easiest to see thing in history. When a country is failing, they take it to war to distract from the politicians and all the failures of the politicians. And people forget 4 years later, and half of them are dead anyway on the battlefield. So as we look at this tabletop exercise that they had done, what happens when the oil stops in the Straits of Hormuz and the cargo shipping stops across the Suez Canal? Then what happens to the economies? Then what happens to the citizens in those economies is they become angry. That's a tabletop exercise followed by the food. And what happens when the food gets disrupted? Well, all eyes are over on the Mediterranean. Well, why don't we look over in and around Taiwan in the South China Sea there, off into the Pacific, the first ring of islands. China's been protruding and intruding just an enormous amount. Not making so much news, but these are all of the what would be considered intrusions into another's airspace that is illegal in most international treaties. But China says, whatever. So they're going to blast through and just cause provocation. And you notice at the very bottom there, Chinese Navy, as they were really far out off the coast, now they're getting closer and closer and closer. And look, they're just down to the south of Taiwan there. And the air flights are also getting closer in terms of airspace. Now, we've seen these kind of diagrams in the Mediterranean where they're showing you all the assets that are around. Well, this is just one that's over around in the East China Sea. We see there's a few carrier groups around. You know, we got the U.S. assets over there. Chinese assets are out. Got some bombers and contingents all the way from Korea to Japan. And that first ring of islands there would include Taiwan. When you jump out, then we come out to Guam at the second ring. And, you know, this is not being talked about so much, but it could flare off here too. And as was told to me, this is more than a year ago. Once Russia had bogged down the United States, that China was going to move eventually if America got too bogged down. Well, now we're seeing that they didn't get bogged down on a single front just with Russia. They're now bogged down, excuse me, over in the Middle East too. Double front war there? Are you kidding me? What are they going to do over here? Nothing. All the assets are stationed over in the Middle East. So if something goes down here, yeah, they got a carrier group. China will sink that pretty fast. They got the new Sunburn missiles off coast, like the Russians have given Onyx systems over to the Lebanon. So carrier missiles are just going to be a thing. And what you thought were like the most stable naval assets are going to be on the bottom, dripping oil. Wonder how the Green movement has been really protesting this war on all the movements of the heavies in the air and the heavies on sea, right? You see them protesting all about all the emissions from the war, don't you? Yeah, right. Not a peep anywhere. Paid for opposition. But the rest of the tabletop exercise after the Straits of Hormuz closed down, move into this, the food is going to stop at that point. And they're talking like 60 to 70% reductions of global agriculture if it gets into a global war. Especially focused on the Straits of Hormuz and that whole Middle Eastern area, because at that point, then other nations would embargo those on whichever side is of chosen. So that's way different than just cutting off the oil, because there's other pipelines and other routes to take oil out. But if those same sets of nations are like, we're not even going to sell it to you. This is where the tabletop exercise kind of concluded was, we in America are going to end up with food lines like this. And I can't imagine Americans standing 5, 6, 8, 10 blocks deep, 12, 15 people deep on the line and wait in line to get food. And then what if it runs out? Of course, they're moving to a digital thing here. They're going to be moving to digital rationing cards. The days of your grandma giving you the book so you could go to the store are long gone. That's why they want and will need and fast track the implementation of a digital ID, because it'll be associated and intertwined with you. You're going to have your face and your fingerprints on it, your iris scan on this food stamp card or whatever ration card to assure that there's no theft going on, or assure equality. And look at all the keyword terms we're going to hear again. Equity, inclusion, make sure everybody gets one loaf of bread. That's communism. Oh, I forgot. But anyway, they're going to fast track you onto the digital ID here by starving you. And it's not just the war planned out like that. You see, it's not everything so planned so quickly. Not for the Bank for International Settlements. Here's where the rubber meets the road on this. Now I'm going to go through a couple projects. Project Icebreaker is the first one. And what they want to do is a retail central bank digital currency. That's for me and you to use out on the street to purchase packs of gum, purchase a new shirt. But the stability of that has to remain one-to-one no matter what happens. It needs to be pegged one-to-one so the Bank for International Settlements can control it on their distributed ledger. So that means tokenizing assets. To be able to then program that asset to hold value with zero deflation or inflation, or program in a steady deflation or inflation rate that can then be gamed out years into the future. This is their ultimate plan for cross-border. Because in America now, if we come up with a CBDC, it'll be used inside the United States. But what they really need is something that can be used internationally. If you'll even be allowed to travel or use your stable token to be able to purchase an air ticket. That's a big if, as we see the world moving. But they need to collaborate with, and you'll see the very bottom there, Bank of Israel. Oh, wow. Norges Bank and Riksbank, which is up in, those are the Scandinavian countries. and the Bank for International Settlements Innovation Hub. So right away when I saw Bank of Israel, I'm like, what's going on here? So DLT, just a refresher for those who are unfamiliar with distributed ledger. It's an instant settlement where it's just like an accounting book that zeroes itself out on a predetermined time. So when you're doing proof of work, proof of stake, proof of time, that doesn't zero itself like a ledger does for any business. Those of you in Accounting 101 would understand a balanced ledger at the end of the day, week, month, or year. Well, they can do it every 5 seconds, every 1 hour, whatever they choose to program into the settlement. Now, Hyperledger Fabric, that's going to be the thing at the center of the center. And Hashgraph will also be right there. And everything from that will be spokes for the wheel coming out. So Ripple, so far as we understand this digital ecosystem for cryptocurrency, it's the only one that is public. Now there's a mishmash, a ton of them that are private. But in terms of public available purchasing for distributed ledger tokens and settlements, RippleNet. So that's why there was the lawsuit there with the FTC and the CFTC, these sort of things. But that's sort of been absolved now that they need to roll in. And I think I covered this, it had to been at least several months ago, the ISO 20022 compliant cryptocurrencies that will be used in this new system. So they have to have and adhere to the ISO. So there's no competing ticker symbols like Bitcoin interferes, Ethereum interferes with another country code. So there's a lot of things that they won't be used either because it can't be centralized or it interferes with another's already predetermined 3-letter code off of settlements on central banks or something like this. So Ripple right at the top, Stellar Lumens is going to be the fast usage of currency moving forward for a lot of this. The stablecoin will be pegged to Stellar Lumens and they're going to kind of run in parallel like this. And Hedera, Hashgraph, HBAR, Quant, and Cardano. So take a look at these and see how they're moving. A lot of them have fallen in price. But really, who's the players involved in this? So the institutional players, these are the ones, these are going to be called the intermediary banks when we move forward in the other slides. So these are going to be the ones that are going to be the cross swaps and also hold the assets. And who do we see here so far? Nomura, ING, Barclays, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan. Maybe I could, oh, there we go. Wide that out for us here. I don't see Bank of America there. That's why I'm saying a lot of people have been pointing to Bank of America being the sacrificial lamb that is going to bring the system down. Too big to fail on purpose to bring the system down, to usher in this system. The banks on the bottom that are tier 1 asset holders of less than 1%, most of them except for BNY, they're going to be responsible for the interface of the tokenized assets to you through another intermediary. But look who's not on the list. That is the whole thing. Once you see that, you can figure out which banks are going to fail. These are the chosen ones to bring us to the light. And if we look at central bank digital currency projects, before this was a conspiracy theory, just even a few years ago. Oh, no, nobody's working on that. How dare you talk about it? We would never do that. We'd never set up sovereignty to an extra national entity. No way. You're drinking the Kool-Aid. So far it's over 125, maybe 135 central banks issuing their own central bank digital currency. And I thought, you know what? I'm wondering how many countries are in the world? 222. So if I go back for a second, about 135 already have a program in play out of 222 central banks in the entire planet, which is more than half. More than half. So we know there's some legs to this. Now, there's some countries that'll never get it, like Cyprus, Kosovo, Somalia, or Somaliland, how they South Ossetia, Taiwan, and Transnistria. Now, they'll never have their own. So you can subtract 7 off of that anyway. So we're down 200 and some plus there. Now, another way to look at it is this. And I want you to take a look at who's in the BRICS-aligned nations and who already has functional pilot programs that are like 1 button press away from going live. That dark tan color. And a very short step behind it would be the purples. Purples would be 2 button presses and literally just a month or two, and they'll be ready to go. So they're kind of holding this on the shelf, a lot of this. So how does it match up is the more the question. Well, here is the free trade BRICS aligned nations for trading at the moment. And notice who is very close. I'll wind it back to you. Now overlay the parts of India, Brazil, China, with a lot of the Middle Eastern OPEC nations and over into Central America. Now let me pull that back for you. Look how many of them are either functional or at the edge of being functional. It pans right into this. So everybody's moving forward with this at the same time. BRICS aligned nation CBDC, fully evaporated US dollar, re-emergence out of the Phoenix CBDC. But whatever it is going to be interoperable across all nations on the entire planet. It's not going to be an us and them. It's going to be everybody still uses it. So Project Aurum, and for those of you in history, Aurum is the Sumerian word for gold. And then subsequent translations up through, was it the Phoenicians, the Greek, and Assyrians, and it all has a little bit slightly different meaning, but gold or some kind of valuable treasure is at the base of that word. So Project Aurum, and this is the Hong Kong Monetary Authority. I did tons of research on this over the last week or so. See that I put it in, I highlighted it there. CBDC-backed stable coin. A stable coin. The problem is they can't keep it stable because it's pegged off of fiat currencies. This is the whole drawback in the stoppage of these going 100% live is they need to have it with an asset backed, not fiat. And lo and behold, the BRICS nations are all going to back all of the new money by assets. Wow. Prophetic. Now the W is just called wrapped, and the R is for retail. So as we go through and take a look at the different types of, and just I'll hit this one before we go on the break. And this is what I mean is the red that you see there, that is all fiat-backed stable coin. So they can't really guarantee that one will equal one always. Now during financial turmoil, that goes way less than one or way over one. And we saw that with the collapse of the different banks. Now, what does remain stable is C, the very, very thin line of gold. By the way, essentially they used yellow for that gold, the commodity backed, which means it can retain its stability, especially if it's tokenized and there's a smart contract written against that asset. Then they can peg it at 1-to-1 and program in that it never deflates or never inflates. Then they can get their stable coin that they, sorry, I keep forgetting that I have these charts whited out for you here. But the unbacked is just faith like the US dollar. What's really backing the US dollar except the strong military that says we're going to whoop you to a pulp if you don't keep using the dollar? But a lot of people have gone away from that, as you've seen, and there's a lot of stability and inflation in our homeland here because the big stick got a lot shorter. Somebody had a chainsaw and cut the big stick in half. Well, actually 5 dudes held down and cut it off. So that's where we sit as of today. So the crypto backed is really kind of a misnomer because a lot of the crypto backed is fiat backed, but Pax Gold is an example of a commodity backed cryptocurrency. So when we come back from the break, we're going to roll through a little bit more, but I'll tantalize you here. The stable coins versus tokenized deposits. This is truly how it is going to roll out. Everything you knew about stable coins and fiat currencies, you're going to have to scratch that. That's going to be the past. Moving into tokenized stable coins, that's the future. If you can't stabilize it, that's not going to work in the new banking system. So this is going to be the conversion of everything you knew about private ownership into centralized ownership. They can't have a new system that relies on stability in it with no movement unless they can program it that there's no inflation or deflation, but then they have to completely remove your ability to own something and trade it on the free market. Because at that point, it's just true value of, will you pay more for it? Yes or no? Then it's outside the control of that. And if it's outside the control of that, say your farm, your house, your car, the fisheries of a country, the forests of a country, if it lies outside that realm, then there can be no stable coin. And that's the whole thing. They want to make a new currency that will not move, that will be good across any nation, but one will always have to equal one. It cannot even deviate 1,000th of a cent. Because if you're talking about hundreds of billions or trillions of dollars in settlement, that 1,000th of a cent turns into tens of millions of dollars. So it can 1/10,000th of a cent, 100,000th of a cent, it cannot move. This is where the programmable money comes in after they tokenize all assets on the planet. So here we go. I'm a fan of the Bank for International Settlements. They do put everything out. If you think it's some backroom closet conspiracy and people hushing back and forth, you're greatly mistaken. They put everything out here for you. They have to. It's just, you need to go diving in and looking for a needle in like 35 haystacks. We got one needle. I'm going to throw it out there and I'll give you 10 haystacks and go find it. So here you go. Stablecoins versus tokenized deposits. Implications for the singleness of money. Now, singleness, you might not understand that word, but it means no movement in the value of it at all. 0.00000, no movement. And the problem is they're having a huge difficulty with singleness. So that second part here, I'll even read the key takeaways out of the paper. Private tokenized monies that circulate as a bearer instrument, meaning in today's price value, you can ask for that asset back, gold, silver, monies, whatever, land, cars, anything that you could sell, art, anything. You could tokenize that, but the price can move up and down and give it back. And the bearer instrument might be the contract that says I own it, or it might be the paper dollar that says I'll buy it from you, whatever it would be. Stable coins also, if you're going to use Tether or USDC or something, it might depart from the relative exchange value, meaning it could go up or down based on that zero value. It could be worth more, it could be worth less. They call that par. And then that's going to be a violation of the singleness of money, meaning 0.000, it never moves. That's where they're stuck in between a rock and a hard place. They had to solve that problem where the money would never move in value unless they programmed it in a smart contract to move up or down at a specified date and rate. So part 2 here, and it says the tokenized deposits that do not circulate as bearer instruments, but rather settle in central bank money are conducive to singleness. Now, if you read that, you go, what is that talking about? Like take my farm, for example. If they tokenize it and they give a value of, say, $20,000 an acre for 25 acres, they have a stable value on that. And then they wrap that token into, and they program it in that David's farmland will never change value ever. And it's worth this much. And then they have that amount of hundreds of thousands of dollars to put onto the market as a stable coin to be moved back and forth based off the value of the land, the farm, the farmhouse, the barn, the animals, the orchard, and all this other stuff here. And it will never change value. It's locked in on that token. That's how they stabilize it. But because they'll swoop the farm and the land and everything, are they owners of it, or do we retain rental rights, or how does that work? Because everything on the planet will be tokenized. And that is the whole thing. They need to maintain this. And for a perfect example, when Silicon Valley went down and also FTX collapsed, FTX stablecoin, you lost 100% of value on that. Also, other things like USDC, that's Circle's stablecoin US dollar pegged, went up to $1.02. That's a 2% rise. Oh, bad for business. And then if you look at when Silicon Valley collapsed, USDC collapsed to 90 cents. Like that was a no-brainer. If anybody would have seen 90 cents, could have just backed the truck up, dumped a bunch of money in there and wait, because you knew it was going to restabilize again, and that you would have made 10% on a single move. So this is the singleness that they're terrified of, the non-singleness, the movement of the money. They need to prevent this, remove it, and guarantee it never happens ever again in order for this new monetary system to move forward. And this is the whole thing, that when they say you will own nothing, that's truly what they mean. They need to tokenize every asset on the planet where you won't own it. And what we consider like ownership in a private sense today, where prices can go up or down depending on the demand. And here's the thing, this is another project, PIX trial is the name of this one. Now, all this is available on the Bank for International Settlements website, and they have all these different, if you see project something, you definitely need to dive into it because it's a different layer of this rollout. that's culminated in one single overall grand plan. But using traditional finance assets as the backing are vulnerable to run risks. So they get it also. This whole paper just talks about the issuer, the redemption, meaning I want it back, could bankrupt the new system if they aren't able to control it digitally and contractually 100%, and only them as the arbiter of the value of it. No other external influences whatsoever at all. BIS controls it all. And then from there, they issue to what we know as central banks that can have their coins backed by that assets that's tokenized. That way the issuance from the bank going out to me or anybody else out there will always equal 1-to-1, because they'll own everything on the planet at that point, if they're allowed to get away with it. But we all can stand up and say no as humanity. That's the greatest thing. We all can say no, hell no, and it'll stop. But if people are just forced into it with no preparations, no back plans, and they're terrified because they have no other choice, then not a lot of people are going to say no. I brought you this slide about 2 weeks ago here. It was the blueprint for the unified ledger, and that's the basis of all this tokenization and control of all assets on the planet. And at the very bottom, I even wrote it out. I took copy pasted some stuff from in the inside of the articles here. A new type of financial market infrastructure, FMI, if you're familiar with that, and the unified ledger. Unified means all assets on the whole planet controlled by one ledger and one institution, BIS. And they really talk about fisheries, shorelines, forests, rivers, water, all water on the entire planet will be tokenized. You'll have to pay a usage fee for using rainwater after this. Yeah. So deeper into the whole project there, customer-facing retail, or the retail payment side, mainly that's done by the stores or the credit card companies, that sort of today, handled by the private sector. But see, the central bank's going to own everything at this point. So if they don't have 2 or 3 firewalls in front of them, this is also what scares them. So you could claim directly on the central bank then, and they can't have that either. So what they're doing is they're setting up multiple firewalls between you and that central bank to claim on that asset that they've tokenized that could have been previously your car, your farm, whatever, your labor. So then they have to get all these different sector payments in, and we'll run through it here. You see where on the bottom there, that blue that says assets, that's everything on the planet tokenized. Locked into a smart contract, it never moves in value unless they let it move in value. And then we get into the banks, where then the central banks, as you understand, like Federal Reserve, etc., intermediary banks like JP Morgan could be, then they'll handle all these payments in lieu of, and then you come down to your regional bank outside that, and then you firewall it off onto your app in your social credit score. This is moving fast. I didn't realize how in place a lot of it. The only thing they need is this global war to kick off, to stop all economy, crash it to the ground, and this is what we get. So you got to look out, what's the timeline until something like a global World War III really kicks off, the oil stops, the food stops, the economy stops, and then they bring this up out of the ashes. This is what's the replacement after all this stuff. So how much money can they milk out on the way down? How long do you think it'll really take before we get into a global meltdown is more the question. Because after the complete global meltdown, this arises. And this is going to be almost instant. It's already ready to go. That's the thing. They're just waiting for the downtrend phase, the evaporation, and then boom, this thing comes out. Like literally just, oh, hey, I got it in my pocket. Just pull it out, ready. So here, everything in one place, unified ledger, and they actually do some decent graphics for like basic to understand it. You're way on the outside wheel, the way outside red. And then we got what you consider like central banks or big banks in between us. And then you have that big behemoth in the center, that dark red central bank there. And I said, I've seen that somewhere before. Oh, yeah. It's in the blueprint for future money, which is a separate report, by the way. And they're going to be able to program in, like I said, we covered this slide once before, assets that can be used, what you can do on the land, how long you can retain it, if there'll be any increase in value or not, because then they can control inflation. There's going to be a lot of stipulations programmed into it. For sure, there's going to be a lot of non-usage clauses in there, like David can't have any cattle on his land. He can't have any sheep or goat out there either. If we see one sheep, you lose the land, and you need to pay a fine. So all the information is going to be stored in all these giant Google data centers and all that stuff. That's to store all this information. It's not for, they overbuilt those things by about 1000x to get ready to store all this information. And they're building all of these gigantic data storage warehouses. They duped everybody into thinking it was just harvesting emails. It was just recording phone calls and blah, blah, blah. It's to keep all the information about all these movements of ledger and money across the planet when this comes live. So if you put these two slides together, they make a lot more sense, but they're in two different reports. So you kind of need to see what you're looking at. They color coded it really well. Red is red, right in the center, tokenized everything. And then they come out to a few more reports here, and we'll jump through there. Oh, there we go, stop. Tokenized, they even put new labels on stuff I'd never heard before, tokenized asset providers. Now, they don't really delve into what this particular thing means, but it's another firewall between the central bank, which owns all of the tokenized assets. And then there's a layer of asset providers outside that. Perhaps they deem value. Perhaps it's like, you know, when you go to buy a house, somebody has to come out and do an assessment on it and give you a value. Perhaps it's that type of layer in between. Private art collection, I don't know how much it's worth. Send the tokenized asset provider to go out and give me a value, and then we'll tokenize all the art collection after that. Something at this level here. And then the tokenized private money providers, those are what we know as banks. And they're going to be the third layer down. You will own nothing if this is truly the plan and they get away with it. And part of it is also to restart the supply chains after the war. Now, reading more deeply, see that when I put this and did this, like, oh, that had been a better part of a month ago, the war wasn't in play right then. Israel hadn't kicked off. There was only Russia and Ukraine. But now both of these kicked off, it makes more sense. So if we come into a global war here and oil shut off and food is, there's starvation, people are running around, there's, you know, just everything is shut down supply chain wise. You're never going to believe a supplier. You're never going to believe a vendor. You're never going to believe somebody who says, I'll pay you on the other end of a telephone line or a ham radio that's using repeaters to get an order in across the world. You're never going to believe it. So what they're going to have to do is set up the stability rock solid again, like using gold as the base, the cornerstone, like the Shanghai Gold Exchange. Then you'll believe it to a point. But so you're going to have to believe it enough that one token equals 1 ounce of gold or whatever they put it to, that's now yours and it's redeemable somewhere. The whole thing is to start the flow of payments, restart the flow of goods after it's all evaporated. It'll start again, mark my words. We're never going to sit here and squalor for the rest of our lives. Never going to happen. Humans don't operate that way. Governments don't operate that way. The destructive phase is underway. We're going to hit the bottom at some point. And from that point, we're going to bounce back out. However long that takes, I think it's going to be way, 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 way faster than anything we've ever seen in history. But they need to get the supply chains up and running again. And the only possible way they can do it is a global unified one world government and one world currency operating on a unified system across the planet, that your tokens are redeemable anywhere on the planet at the same exact value anywhere on the planet. That's the only way it works. And sure looks like it's in play, and that's what the plan is. So a lot of this is based on restarting supply chains and financial institutions to issue all that debt again to start the next 80-year, fourth turning cycle here. I'm just curious how long this will last before it really goes defunct again. But here's the ultimate, this is their last slide in at least that one presentation, was they want to have the central bank controlling all assets. They want to have the intermediary bank that they offer assets to in terms of stablecoin. That's where that CBDC comes from. That never moves, backed by the assets that are completely controlled 100% by the Bank for International Settlements, the World Bank, and the IMF. Then they're going to issue that 100% stable coin instead of a fiat currency, because all fiats pretty much will have collapsed by that point in a global war. and then they'll allow the people to use it. Don't ask me how they're going to reissue loans off of this after everything's collapsed, after they've swooped everybody's assets and tokenized them, and then I'm not sure how that works. But Project SELA, if you want to look for the big dog, I finally came to this after doing a whole bunch of other research, and finally, I wish I would have found this first, because it shows you all the projects on the left over there we've been looking at. Project Aurum, Roseland, Polaris, to name a few. And then they come into the cybersecurity, the ECB digital euro, the digital shekel. You start to see a lot of these things that are collapsing right now, like European Union and Israel. They're collapsing, the banks, the monetary systems, the whole countries, regions are deflating. And it's all going to move to this, what's called Unidroit, which is the unified ledger here. So you can see how central banks work, Bank for International Settlements. This is kind of your schematic to see. So it's actually, if you're going to do any research, it's all under Project SELA, S-E-L-A, and everything dovetails off that. And then, Project Roseland, there's 3 or 4 projects going off there as their own independent base layer off that. So you can go down the wormhole on this one if you want to. But World Economic Forum pushing for central bank digital currency, global interoperability. That's the next phase. Well, it's multi-phased. Interoperability needs to come in once they get the tokenized assets ready. They're going to have to be able to cross swap anywhere in the world. That's what all this is, universal digital payments network. It's got to work seamlessly across every nation on the planet, all with the stability of a non-moving, stable 1 = 1. I don't even know what they'll name it. It sure is not going to be $1. But lo and behold, don't worry, we got you covered on the taxes. IMF's got this here on the taxing stablecoin section. So Bank for International Settlements has its own thing. World Economic Forum has its bit. World Bank has its own bit for natural resources. And then, of course, the IMF comes off on the taxing side here. Don't worry, we can tax your stablecoins when you earn them directly from the coin and the transference from point A to point B. You don't even have to worry about filing taxes anymore. We're going to siphon the tax money as soon as that coin moves. So 1 will equal 1. Absolutely, and won't change in value. By the time it reaches your hand, though, it might only be 50% of 1 because they've removed all the taxes out of it in advance. They're so nice to do that. I don't even have to think about paying taxes. I could just don't have to save receipts. I don't need like QuickBooks anymore. Don't need it. Thank you, IMF. You can just tax me right away, and boom, it's tax at point of sale. VAT and the income tax. See, they get you coming and going. Not only are they going to take your land, but the SELA, this is the retail CBDC. See that super stacked, super thick green? That's your CBDC wallet that will operate off your social credit score. And then you got these other institutions. Note ATM app. It doesn't say ATM, it's app. Deposit app. There's nothing more on this physical. And here we come access enabler. And these 2 words should be burned in your memory. Access enabler. This is your social credit score overseer. Based on them enabling you to use the money based on your thoughts, your actions, they can say yes or no. So the existing digital payments, like you move from the bank, you go from me or Alice to the Alice's bank, to the central bank, that's why the ACH and the wire transfer is all locked up on Friday, because part of that broke. With the new CBDC payments, Alice is going to go through Alice's access enabler, and they will check her social credit score. And if she's allowed to move the money, it'll move over to the central bank and then back over to the receiver or the merchant or me. Oh, she won't. I talk about the climate. She won't be able to send me anything. So the person, this is a real important one. Like the regular cryptocurrency, like if I was to send Sean some money, person-to-person cryptocurrency transfer, I just put in my wallet address and it goes over to another person's wallet address. That fast. But see, the new CBDC, they lose control. So they want to route it this way. So it'll go from the wallet to the social credit enabler to the central bank back, and they got to check Bob's social credit score, and then Bob can get the money, maybe. If it gets sent and Bob can't because bad social credit score, it doesn't, this is the sad thing, it doesn't get reverted on a reverse transaction. It just disappears because you were connected with a bad person. and that is your fine for connecting with the wrong type of people. So if your payment's denied because of their low social credit score, they keep the funds because that is your penalty for even knowing them. This is the world they have planned, just like China, exactly like China. And here's a good one. Converting deposits to CBDCs. You're going to have to take your money from now, load it into the wallet app, and then it never comes back out. It's digitized one time. So any current value will move into the system, and in the future, you'll only be issued these digits in the system. And you got to wonder why. Why are there dirt streets all over these immaculate buildings? Why are they still on dirt streets? There was a reset, just like we're experiencing right now. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week. Bye for now. And if you like more of this type of content, join me on Patreon, where I'm loading different videos that I cannot put up onto YouTube that talk about some of these same issues, but deeper, to go beyond the censors. Patreon.com/adapt2030. Slide decks right along with the videos. And I appreciate every single one of you. Thank you so much for allowing this information to flow forward.